Lydia was crying. Zac looked like he was reaching the end of what he could take, and the room that was supposed to bring the Plath family closer suddenly felt like the exact place where something was quietly breaking beyond repair. Because this was not just another uncomfortable family talk. This was the moment Lydia stopped looking like the daughter who would smooth everything over and started looking like a wife who was tired of watching her marriage sit in the middle of everyone's suspicion. What made it so hard to watch was not only the emotion on Lydia's face, it was the silence around her, the way every person in that room seemed to be carrying their own version of the story, with some seeing Zac as the problem, some seeing Lydia as changed, and Lydia sitting there like she was being asked to prove that loving her husband did not mean she had abandoned the family that raised her. That is where the whole situation became bigger than one argument, because when a family has known someone as the calm one, the faithful one, the one who usually takes the pressure and still tries to keep peace, they do not always know what to do when that person finally says, "No, this is hurting me, and I am not going to keep pretending it is fine just so everyone else can stay comfortable." And that is the uncomfortable question hanging over this whole episode. Did Lydia really turn against her family? Or did she simply stop carrying their discomfort for them? Because from Lydia's side, Zac is not some outside threat who walked into the Plath family to cause damage. He is her husband, the person she chose, the person she is building a life with. And every time the family questions his motives or his tone or his place in their world, Lydia does not just hear concern. She hears doubt in her own judgment, doubt in her marriage, and maybe even doubt in the woman she is becoming. But from the family's side, this probably does not feel simple either, because Zac's words and behavior have landed in a way that made people feel judged. And once a person gets that reputation inside a family, every sentence gets studied, every pause feels loaded, every opinion sounds bigger than it may have been meant to sound, and suddenly nobody is reacting to the moment anymore. They are reacting to the fear they brought into the room before Zac even spoke. That is why this meeting felt less like healing and more like a quiet trial, because Zac was not just answering for one comment, he was answering for every uncomfortable feeling the family had attached to him, while Lydia was not just defending one man, she was defending the right to be trusted as an adult. And maybe that is what scared everyone the most. Not that Lydia defended Zac, but that she had the strength to do it in front of them. Because in a family where peace often came from staying in your role, Lydia stepping out of that role could only look like rebellion to people who were not ready to see her as separate from them. But this finale did not create the conflict. It exposed it, and the real fracture began before Lydia and Zac ever had a fair chance to start their marriage. Before Lydia ever cried in that finale room, the damage had already started on what should have been one of the happiest weekends of her life. Because the night before her wedding was not remembered as peaceful, sweet, or full of excitement. It was remembered by Lydia as the hardest night of her life, and that one detail changes the entire way this family conflict has to be understood. This was not just a daughter upset because her family had questions, and it was not just a family being mean for no reason, because the truth sits in a much more uncomfortable place, where people who said they cared about Lydia may have believed they were protecting her, while Lydia was standing there feeling like the people closest to her were turning the beginning of her marriage into a warning sign, before it even had a chance to breathe. That is why the wedding became more than a wedding. It became the first real test of whether the Plath family could trust Lydia as an adult. And from Lydia's point of view, some of them failed that test before she even walked down the aisle. Her family had concerns about how fast the relationship moved. And honestly, that part is not impossible to understand. Because when someone gets married quickly, especially inside a family already shaped by painful breakups, public conflict, divorce, and years of trust issues, people are going to get nervous, people are going to ask questions, and people are going to wonder if love is moving faster than wisdom. But the way concern is delivered can decide whether it feels like love or control. And that is where this whole story gets sharp. Because Lydia was not only hearing questions about the timeline, she was hearing judgment about Zac, about his motives, about whether he was right for her, and even personal questions that crossed into territory no groom should have to carry into his own wedding day. So when she later sat in front of her family and cried, she was not reacting to one fresh. Argument. She was reacting to a wound that had been sitting there since the start of her marriage. The family thought they were asking hard questions. Lydia heard something else completely. She heard that her happiness was not being trusted, that her choice was being inspected, and that Zac was being treated less like a man joining the family and more like a threat the family needed to investigate, which is why her defense of him later felt so intense, because once a bride feels like her husband was judged before he was known, every new criticism starts sounding like proof that nothing has really changed. But this is not clean, and that is exactly why it works as a story. The family may have seen behavior that worried them, and Lydia may have been too close to the relationship to see how Zac was landing with others, while Zac may have walked in wanting acceptance, but also carrying a tone that made people feel corrected instead of welcomed. And the more he tried to explain himself, the more some relatives seemed to believe their first impression was right. That is the trap. When a family decides someone is a problem, almost everything that person does can be used as evidence. And when a couple feels judged, almost every concern can feel like an attack. So by the time Lydia started looking like she had turned against her own family, the truth may have been much deeper, because maybe she was not turning against them at all. Maybe she was still standing in the pain of that wedding weekend, still asking why the people who loved her could not protect her joy without damaging it at the same time. And the real twist is that Lydia may not be the only one who changed, because the whole Plath family had changed. The old structure had cracked. The parents were no longer the same united force. The older siblings had their own heartbreaks, and Zac entered right when everybody was already carrying fear from another chapter. By the time fans started choosing sides, the family had already done the same thing. The moment the finale aired, the fight did not stay inside the Plath family anymore, because suddenly the audience stepped into the room too, and that is when the story became even harder to judge, because people were no longer only reacting to what Lydia, Zac, Ethan, Kim, Barry, Mariah, and the others said to each other. They were reacting to a few edited moments that made everyone feel like they had enough evidence to decide who was right and who was dangerous. The clip that really lit everything up was the confessional moment where Zac appeared to cut Lydia off, and for a lot of viewers, that 1 second said more than the whole episode, because they saw a husband speaking over his wife, they saw Lydia looking emotional, and they started connecting that moment to every concern the family had already raised about Zac, as if the camera had finally caught the thing everybody had been worried about. But then Lydia responded, and the story stopped being so easy. She said she was not offended, that the interview day had been painfully long, that she was emotionally drained, and that Zac stepped in because she did not have the strength to keep answering, which forced viewers to deal with the one thing reality TV never wants to make simple. We do not see the whole life. We see the version that survives the edit. And that is where the audience has to slow down, even if slowing down is apparently illegal on the internet now, because there are two different truths fighting each other at the same time. One truth is that Zac's tone can land badly, especially when people already feel judged by him, because if a family thinks someone is correcting them, even a normal sentence can feel like a lecture, and if viewers already believe Zac is too forceful, then one interruption becomes more than one interruption. It becomes a pattern they think they can finally name. The other truth is that Lydia is the person actually inside that marriage, not the comment section. And when she says the moment was misunderstood, that matters too, because there is a real danger in acting like a woman must be wrong about her own experience, just because the audience saw a clip that made them uncomfortable. So now the conflict is no longer just Lydia against her family. It is Lydia against the way people think they know her life. It is Zac against a public judgment that may be based on behavior, but may also be sharpened by editing, suspicion, and the need to pick a villain before the episode is even over. And that is what makes this part so twisted, because the same thing Lydia felt from her family may now be happening again with viewers, where people see a small piece of Zac, decide they understand the whole relationship, and then call it protection when they push Lydia toward the answer they already chose for her. That does not mean Zac gets a free pass. It means the audience has to be honest about what they know and what they are filling in, because reality TV gives viewers confidence without full context, and that confidence can become dangerous when people start turning concern into certainty, especially in a marriage that is still new, still emotional, and still trying to survive a family system where every mistake becomes public evidence. And maybe that is the ugliest part of all. Because while fans were arguing over whether Zac was misunderstood or controlling, whether Lydia was strong or blind, whether the family was protective or judgmental, the episode was quietly moving towards something much heavier than one confessional clip. Underneath the Zac debate was a deeper family wound, and once Joshua's name entered the room, the whole story changed. The moment Joshua's memory enters the episode, the fight stops feeling like a simple marriage problem and starts feeling like something much deeper, because suddenly the room is not only holding Lydia's tears, Zac's frustration, and the family's suspicions, it is also holding years of grief, divorce, public embarrassment, broken trust, and all the pain this family has learned to carry without always knowing how to talk about it. That is why this part hits differently, because when a family has already lived through loss, they do not always respond to new conflict in a normal way. They become alert, they become protective, they start looking for danger before danger is even clear, and sometimes they convince themselves they are saving someone when really they are trying to control the feeling of losing someone again. So when the family looks at Lydia and Zac, the reaction may not only be about Zac's words or Zac's tone or whether he made people feel judged, because underneath all of that is a family that has already watched their old structure fall apart, with Kim and Barry no longer standing together the way they once did, Ethan and Olivia's marriage already becoming another painful example of love turning into distance, and now Lydia's new marriage arriving right in the middle of all that emotional wreckage. And that is where Zac becomes more than a person. He becomes a trigger. He becomes the new place where everyone's fear lands, because it is easier to argue about one husband's behavior than it is to admit that the whole family still does not know how to handle change without blaming somebody for it. But Lydia is not standing outside that pain either, because she grew up inside this same family. She knows the loss, she knows the pressure, she knows what it feels like when people smile through things they never actually fixed. And maybe that is why her sadness feels so heavy, because she does not seem like someone who wants to run away from her family. She seems like someone who wants them to come close without turning her marriage into a problem they need to solve. And then the anniversary surprise arrives, and for a second, it looks like the family is trying to soften the damage, trying to say, "We still love you. We still see your marriage. We still want a future here." But even that sweet moment does not fully erase what came before it, because a party can look like peace while everyone is still bleeding underneath. That is the hard truth with this family. They know how to gather. They know how to remember. They know how to create a meaningful moment. But repair is different from a gesture. And if the fear, judgment, and hurt are still sitting in the room, then even the kindest moment can feel unfinished. Mariah's story adds another layer to this, because her hair loss struggle shows the same pattern in a different form. Hidden pain becoming visible, private suffering becoming public, and someone having to face a part of themselves they cannot hide anymore. That is what keeps happening in this family. The pain always finds a way to show itself. So maybe Zac is not the real threat, and maybe Lydia is not the real rebel, because the bigger danger is that the Plath family keeps trying to heal old wounds while reopening new ones, and every time someone changes, everyone else acts like change itself is the enemy. So did Lydia turn against her family, or did she finally expose the rule everyone else was still living under? So when everything is finally stripped down, the answer is not that Lydia simply turned against her family, because that would be too easy, too clean, and honestly too convenient for a story this messy, since what really happened is that Lydia stepped into a new kind of loyalty, the kind that comes with marriage, boundaries, and adulthood, and the Plath family had to face a version of her they were not used to seeing. For years, Lydia was the dependable one, the soft one, the daughter who could be trusted to stay close, stay calm, and keep the peace even when the peace cost her something. But once she became Zac's wife, the emotional order changed, because she was no longer only someone's daughter or sister. She was also part of a new household, with a new bond, a new priority, and a new responsibility to protect the life she chose. And that is where the family seemed to struggle, Because they may have looked at Lydia defending Zac and felt like she was rejecting them, while Lydia may have looked at their concern and felt like they were rejecting her judgment. And once both sides started feeling abandoned, every conversation became heavier than it needed to be. But that does not mean Zac is automatically right. If his words come across too sharp, too defensive, or too quick to correct people, then the family is allowed to feel uncomfortable with that, because intention does not erase impact. And even a person who believes they are being honest can still make others feel judged if the delivery sounds more like a verdict than a conversation. At the same time, that does not mean the family is automatically right either, because concern can turn into pressure when people keep questioning someone's choices after that person has already made them. And love can start to feel like control when every boundary gets treated like disrespect. That is why the finale felt so unsettling. Nobody fully won. The family showed love, but also judgment. Lydia showed strength, but also pain. Zac showed frustration, but also a desire to be understood. And somewhere in the middle of all that, the real issue became clear. This family was not only arguing about one marriage, they were arguing about whether Lydia still belonged to them in the same way she used to. That is the part that hurts, because sometimes families do not realize they are holding on to an older version of someone until that person stops acting familiar. And instead of asking what changed inside them, they start blaming the person standing beside them. Maybe Lydia did not become someone new overnight. Maybe the family just noticed it late. And maybe Zac did not create the break as much as he revealed where the trust was already weak. So the future of this family depends on something very simple, but very difficult. Can the Plaths love Lydia as an adult without turning her boundaries into rebellion? And can Lydia and Zac hear concern without treating every concern like an attack? Because if they cannot, the distance will keep growing, not from one explosive fight, but from 100 small moments where nobody feels heard. And in the end, Lydia did not destroy the family peace. She proved the peace was already fragile.